This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Does the name John Nitti ring a bell? He signed with the New York Jets in 1981 and went on to find success on Wall Street and building athletic fields. Now he shares the secrets of his success in his book, What Would Dad Say?
You know, the book ends with a Jimmy Buffett quote about some of it's magic, some of it's tragic, but I've had a good life along the way. And I think that the tragic part actually convinced me to write the book, because it was really for my children and what I felt they would want to know if I weren't around. So I had a couple of very good friends pass away at young ages, one in a motorcycle accident at around 20, and then another one who passed away of cancer, and he had very little kids. And at that point I said, well, if that happens to me, my kids aren't going to know what I stand for. And so I started writing this over 20 years ago for them. Then 9/11 hit, and my brother-in-law was a firefighter in the Trade Center, and he obviously didn't make it out. And that's when it really started hitting me, that, you know, this is something I've got to get done. And so I wrote it on trains and planes. And then, you know, a few years ago, I was talking to somebody about it at a cocktail party, and they said, you know, you really should have that published, and got me in touch with a couple of publishers, and I chose Page, and that's where we are. But the interesting thing, Alice, is that um, Michael Judge was the FDNY chaplain, and 2 weeks before 9/11, he said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him what you're doing tomorrow.
Yes.
And he is the first documented person in the FDNY to pass that day. So it's all of my rules in life, really, but they're not just my rules. I have had, you know, a varied background, from Yale University to Wall Street to the NFL to, you know, now Land Tech, and I've run into a lot of interesting people. You know, some of the best coaches in the world: Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick. Guys like that, to owners of sports teams, to high-powered business people. Tom Mendoza, who's a self-made billionaire. David Wright is another one, and just a lot of interesting people, highly successful, that have interesting thoughts on life and how they became successful. And so over the years, I wrote a lot of those things down and incorporated them into my rules in life, to try and really think about what has made life successful, enjoyable, and where have there been some pitfalls and how to avoid those. And so, you know, I think you learn from your success and you learn from your failures. And I just tried to document that all so that I could try and help other people, certainly help my kids. That was first and foremost. You know, maybe this would be applicable as a self-help book for really anyone, particularly younger people, and particularly young people that either don't have a father or who lost their father. Put it all out there as far as, you know, what I've learned, and from the people that I've learned it from, who I think are pretty impressive people. I've got some of my favorite rules, and one is that you really don't appreciate success fully until you've had failure, until you've really worked for it, and, you know, it's come around for you. And so, you know, you look in time and time again that there are people that have had instant success and gone into a downward spiral because they didn't have to work for it that hard. Even people that won the lottery, you know, how many of them end up being broke? Also, if you're down and out, if you're having trouble, just keep moving forward, because it could only get better. So I think it was Winston Churchill that said something like, "If you're going through hell, just keep going." It's
All right, John. Good stuff. Thanks so much. It's spring. Let's talk baseball with James Daybach, a Fortune 100 executive who is responsible for New York's red light camera project, by the way. But even more important, he loves baseball. And no doubt you will learn some things you never knew from his book, Ball of Lies.
This book I started probably 10 years ago, but I've had a lot of stops along the way. I've been interested in baseball since I was a little kid. My brother-in-law took me out of elementary school one day so that I could go and watch the first ever Minnesota Twins game played at home. And since then, I've been a baseball fan. I had read some news articles on the discovery of previously believed lost or destroyed papers regarding a group of highly respected national politicians and baseball executives. And the group was known as the Mills Commission. And the Mills Commission decided to communicate to the world a lie that General Abner Doubleday, Civil War hero, was responsible for inventing the sport of baseball in 1839, Cooperstown, New York. And neither Doubleday nor Cooperstown had anything to do with the invention of baseball. But it was reading about the discovery of the Mills Commission papers that piqued my interest.
I thought the birthplace of baseball was Hoboken, New Jersey.
A lot of people do. A lot of people still think that it was Abner Doubleday. Hoboken is sort of a shrine for baseball because it was the hotbed of where baseball became sophisticated. And actually, I'm quite impressed that you thought it was Hoboken because, in fact, it was through Hoboken that a man by the name of Alexander Cartwright and others on his team actually wrote the first cohesive, understandable, and complete rules for baseball.
So, why did they make this up?
Well, why the commission lied to the American public, you'd have to read because it's not a simple matter. But in essence, they stated certain reasons, and the reader has to determine whether those statements are true or false. But basically, it was an effort, supposedly, to bring the American spirit back to the United States at a time when the dangers of war were on the horizon and the American public was not highly motivated to stand up for such American principles. The book covers so much more than baseball. This book has the backdrop of baseball, but there's very little about the sport itself and the way the game is played. It has to do with the executive decisions within baseball, the direction of baseball, but also there are really two parts to the book. The first portion has to do with the efforts of the commission to create the big lie. And the second portion of the book really takes place largely in New York City. It is the efforts that are described by a group of bibliophiles, a legendary librarian who was involved with the Grolier Club and the New York City Public Library. He was in charge of the main reading room, actually, and other efforts by this librarian that he was associated with to expose the truth. But unfortunately, there were powerful people who didn't want him to expose the truth, and as a result, his efforts were stymied.
To me, it just sounds like, a group of people got together and said, we're going to tell you what's good for you.
And in fact, that is the storyline that they held. And there were people such as Theodore Roosevelt, who's in the book, that were associated with all this. And Teddy Roosevelt was amongst the ones, and as a New Yorker, to encourage that American spirit. So he was one of them. And there are some great quotes that are in the book from him as to how sometimes A lie is better than not to lie, depending upon what it is that you are trying to achieve. However, it is believed that some of those characters were more into the lie for ego purposes. But I leave that for the reader to determine. I mean, it is. There are several unknowns here, and I just put all the unknowns on a platter and let the reader make the determination.
All right, James, thank you. A college welding instructor and dean of industrial technologies, people always told Jeff Mitchell he was a great storyteller. So he joined some writing groups, took some classes, and now he's published his first book, Stone City.
The places are historical, the characters are fiction. It's an unconventional relationship between an established married mother of three that was visiting from out of state and a young graduate student from the University of Iowa that was studying history, but also was a consummate blues player in a band.
And they meet in Stone City near Cedar Rapids.
Yeah, they actually meet in Cedar Rapids at an educational conference, which I do have background in educational conferences for sure. And he was actually the presenter on Grant Wood. So Grant Wood is a touchstone throughout this entire story because this character's father studied under Grant Wood in Grant Wood's Stone City Art Colony School of 1931 that actually occurred in Stone City. And so after the first day, they have dinner together. They go dancing afterwards. Then the next day, he invites her to actually see Stone City, which is about 45 minutes north of Cedar Rapids.
And I guess they fall in love?
Yes, they do. It is a real epic love story that changes the trajectory of their lives. And they're only together for 4 days. But it's the type of love that lasts for a lifetime. And there's actually further character development for each of them throughout the rest of the story. Consummates in the last chapter in Washington, D.C. in 1994. But the thrust of the story occurs in 1969. 2 or 3 places in Iowa, and it has been well received. And so far I've had 2 book signings, and I've got 2 more book signings scheduled. COVID has kind of interrupted it a little bit right now, but hopefully within 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to hold my 3rd book signing. But it's been very well received because Grant Wood is really Eastern Iowa is Grant Wood country and his impressionist style of painting. And so the citizens here, they're just very interested in the story, and they become more interested when they start to read it and see the many facets that it touches, because it touches the politics of the late 60s, the Vietnam War of the late 60s, and music. If you're a music buff, and especially if you like the blues whatsoever, there's a lot of songs that are part of this story and things along that nature, so that it appeals to a lot of people in different ways. People get drawn into it. They are surprised every chapter that they read. It's like they never would have imagined what they just read in that chapter. And so that's been, and I tried to do that. I really tried to have it fast. It's very fast-paced moving and a lot of dialogue. 2/3 of the book is dialogue between these 2 people, and it's very natural. It's really nice when you write in the middle of the night, you kind of escape the world a little bit, and you just kind of drift off back in time. I was a teenager in 1969, and so I lived a lot of the things that you read about in this book as far as what's going on in the world. And so that was very easy for me to bring into the story.
All right. Good work, Jeff. Thanks so much. Alice Crowe suffers with a disease called alpha-1, a genetic inherited disorder that increases your risk of developing lung disease, among others. Alice has been dealing with this disease for 12 years, but that hasn't stopped her from writing. And despite contracting COVID, which landed her in the hospital for 5 months, she managed to publish a book inspired by her daughter entitled I'm Only Little.
I wrote the book because my daughter, she was my inspiration because when she was tiny, she had trouble growing. She had a growing problem where her pituitary gland didn't secrete trophin. So she had to take medicine so that she could grow. And every time she accomplished something, it was just like, wow, I did that. Wow, I could reach a button, et cetera, et cetera. And it made me think of being little and going through different experiences, and it was also thinking of my grandbabies and other small children. And I started to think, I said, there are a lot of things that go on that they don't fully understand when they're young. And I said, well, if I could do it in a way that's fun for them to understand it, it'd be great. And that's how I came up with my book. I don't want to spoil the ending for anybody, but it was, say, to teach them how to potty train or accepting a new member in the family or how to do responsibilities. My daughter, for example, she is the main character in it, and she is a small child, and she has to learn how to have a member that comes to the family potty train, and also the responsibility of taking care of this member, and and learning how to accept a new member. She's given a dog, and she's got to teach it how to go out and do potty. And the name of the character is Marina. Teaching potty training, teaching responsibility, accepting a new member to the family. That could be any new member, or it could be a child that comes to the new family. It's just the concept. But the point was that everything was so much bigger to her. Every issue was bigger. Everything was bigger because she was so tiny. And that's how I started to think, every issue is exacerbated too, because, they're so tiny, they don't fully understand everything. Because, you can read it to an infant, for example, and they'd enjoy the book. One, there's a lot of colors, and, it's about an animal, etc. And I know my grandchildren, another I've tested with, up to age 8 and 9, they still enjoyed it. Even adults enjoy it.
Okay.
I did the story and my own illustrations. And I was very, very wow, I did this, And I did contact my local library, so I'm waiting for a call back from that lady. And I found out that it's in the library already down south of me in Charleston.
Great.
Yes, and everywhere I go, I try to promote it. I even sold one in the hospital.
You're too much.
I used to say I have coffee and I will travel. Now I say I have my oxygen and will travel.
All right, Alice, you go. Roxanne Arvizu was sharing her poetry at LA Cafes in 2016 when the death of the artist formerly known as Prince inspired her to write Prince the Poet, a tribute to Prince Rogers Nelson.
So he passed away, and then I was devastated and paralyzed, really. And then only a few days after he passed, I was sleeping and I woke up immediately, and then all of a sudden just this poem came, and I was writing it as fast as I could because it was coming out so quickly. And I knew while I was writing it, it was a book. And so for me, I just feel like I'm just a writer, and this poem has a life of its own, and I'm just here to help it get out in the world.
So is this a book of poetry?
No, it's not actually a book of poetry. It's one poem that I made into a book. When I read it at Muse Cafe, I had been doing a bunch of open mic poetry readings there with all the other poets and writers, and I'd been doing that for about a year. And after I read this poem is when people came up and said, "This should be a book. You should get that illustrated," which I didn't have that reaction before with my poetry, but with this one, everybody was like, "This is a book." And it's interesting because while I was writing it, I knew that it was a book.
So this poem tells a story.
Okay, so the poem is about a butterfly named Prince, And he is fierce and courageous and disciplined, and therefore he slays the dragons of his thoughts, his environment, the naysayers that don't believe in him, and his reality, because in reality he's a caterpillar, but everything in him is telling him that he is so much more. And then in the book, we see him metamorphosize, go into his chrysalis, and then become a monarch butterfly.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And also, the takeaway of the book is following the beat of your own drum and never wavering away from who you are, who you truly are, because who you truly are is your destiny and it will bring you everything you've ever wanted.
Nice. So, why were you so devastated by Prince's passing?
I felt that Prince was a very powerful human being. And I think a lot of people felt that. And I think he knew that. And so when he passed, I literally felt like it shook the universe. Like I felt it in my existence.
And yet your poem is so uplifting. It's all about being positive and being who you are and following your dreams and
Yes, 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 it is. And it also touches on a little tiny part in my book. It touches on when people don't believe in you, and you have to really navigate that part of your journey. Like, are you going to also stop believing in yourself? Or are you going to go to the beat of your own drum?
That's right, Roxanne. Good job. Thank you so much. After 21 years with the U.S. Air Force, Jonathan Williams is preparing for civilian life. He started writing at the age of 10, and between his mom, who was a teacher, and his real teacher, he was given a slew of creative writing assignments that eventually led him to write and publish Wasali, a Starsec story.
I was writing for myself just for enjoyment, and then that turned into, oh, I want to be published one day. I want to find my own audience and make people feel what I feel when I read a book. When you feel like you're in the moment where someone's on a ship in the ocean and you can almost taste the salt on your tongue, right? That's the environmental feeling I get when I read, Stephen Kuntz, or the suspense and subterfuge of Tom Clancy, or the waiting for that next piece of information to drop in anticipation and John Grisham, right? And so that's how all these authors kind of had their own flavor of how they take you on a journey, and I just wanted to be part of that. I wanted to kind of join that club. I'm a big sci-fi guy. I like sci-fi stories, and to tell you the truth, I spent a long time building the universe of Starsec. The Starsec universe is very large, and I spent a lot of time, many years, building out all the nuances of the cultures and the planets, where everybody is, where how everyone lives, and where the twins came from is Misha and Micaiah, the main characters of Wasali. They were characters that I've written prior in stories that I probably won't publish, right? It's the artist's work that he keeps to himself. They were side characters, and then I thought, man, these girls are fun. They're kind of rambunctious and they're a little bit fearless, and they often bite off more than they can chew. And I just thought it would be really fun to have them tell their own story. And as I started typing Wasali, I said to myself, this is going to be my first published book, because I kept smiling. And it was a novella. I picked a stopping point. I didn't want it to be something that was, 800 pages long. And and that's a different kind of, without knowing exactly what that process feels like.
Right, right. Now, they lost their family in a terror attack. So they're left to fend for themselves in this universe. You say they're scavengers and, we follow their journey, how they survive.
I would say they have a moral code, but it's a little loose. If you would imagine, kind of a space adventure swashbuckling pair of orphans, really. They have their own code that they live by, but it's based around survival and making sure that they're good. to me, it's both the fun of the story, and then as we continue in subsequent books, maybe the going to be kind of the crux of their development. There's an interesting mix of new, never before seen technology, like new to us, alien to us, right? Similarly, where you would watch, Star Trek or Star Wars, right? There's technology available that we can comprehend, but we can't duplicate. So, depending on where you are in the universe, similar to how we are here on our own planet Earth, you see cultures embrace technology in different ways. So, there's this sense of kind of adventure, there's a sense of danger, of seeing places that you've never seen and interacting with interesting characters along the way. It's a story for fun, for adventurous, to let your imagination wonder what it would be like. What would I do in this situation? How are they gonna get out of this mess? It's kind of like a if you old school reference here, if you the Dukes of Hazzard TV show. And so you know how it was very common to pause for the commercial or what have you, and the narrator come up. I don't know how them Duke boys going to get out of this one, right? Right? As the car hit the ramp and you're not sure if it's going to make it across the river.
Right.
That
right.
feeling, that's what I want people to walk away.
All right, Jonathan. Good luck in civilian life, and thanks so much for your service. That is a wrap for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. If you want to find out more about our authors and our process, go to pagepublishing.com. If you want to check out the books we talk about here every single week, go to Apple iTunes, Barnes & Noble, or you can always Google a book or an author and find out just about anything, right? If you missed anything, download the podcast on 710WOR.com. We got a new one every single week. Thanks for listening. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. I'll catch you next time.